Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Tundu Abiola.
And I'm Biola Labi.
The British Council is commemorating 75 years of its establishment. The Council has played a key role in defining the unique relationship between Nigeria and Great Britain for close to 60 years. To mark this anniversary, the Cultural Centre has lined up a series of events that would culminate in a grand ceremony on June the 22nd. We're now joined by Ms. Lucy Pearson, who for close to 2 years has been country director at the British Council in Nigeria, and Ojoma Ochai, the program director at British Council with overall responsibility for Nigeria, education and society. Both of them are here to talk about what the British Council has been doing to equip young Nigerians with skill and expertise in education, arts, culture and community activities. They'll also speak about the British Council's plans for the future. Welcome to the program.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you.
So, congratulations on 75 years of the British Council. But according to you guys, it's thanks to us. So tell us about your thanks to you
Thanks
program.
to you. We've been here for 75 years, and it's fantastic. We're really proud of our work. I mean, the British Council has existed as an organisation for over 85 years. With the UK's organisation for cultural relations and educational opportunities. But our work in Nigeria we're very proud of. This very day, 75 years ago, we opened in Lagos, in Marina.
Wow.
For 75 years, we've been running programmes across the arts and creative industries, education, English, justice, society, and delivering internationally recognised exams to over millions of people, creating opportunities, changing their lives, building really important connections. And we're really proud of the work that we've done. And hopefully, thanks to you, we'll continue to be here for 75 years and longer in Nigeria. I mean, maybe Ojoma can say a bit more about some of our work.
Yeah, so I guess the strapline came from the fact that we work a lot in partnership, as you know,
Yes,
Viola.
I do. Full disclosure,
Yeah.
I am one of your partners. I've worked with you in the past, and I
Yeah.
look forward to continuing to work with you.
Exactly, so thanks to you. A lot of what we do is based on partnership and is led by partners in Nigeria that are close to the opportunities, are close to the needs, are close to the networks and the sorts of themes that we want to work around. So that's where that theme has come from, thanks to you. And as we've kind of alluded to, we do work in the arts and creative industries around supporting livelihoods and supporting the sort of ecosystem developments that entrepreneurs need. Either they're already existing entrepreneurs or emerging entrepreneurs that they need to build their businesses and grow their businesses and scale their work to create livelihood opportunities for themselves, but also for others. So we do work in that area. We also work in various other areas in education. And that's still along that theme of livelihoods. And it's based on this idea that from basic education, for example, if you look at teacher capacity, school leadership, those are all factors that determine the outcomes for children. And so we focus particularly on public schools and often in more deprived areas to look at how we can support those mechanisms that can make the learning outcomes for children more positive. So at the moment, we're focusing on things like core skills, so creativity, critical thinking, communications, all those skills that are the skills for the world of work in the future, and seeing how we can embed those in public education from very early on so that those children that are passing through those systems have those better outcomes. So that work in livelihoods runs right through that basic education. We also work on policy in education, so things like inclusive education. We've supported the Albino Foundation, back to that thing around partnership, to do Nigeria's first inclusive education policy that's looking at a robust and holistic approach to special needs education, disability in education, etc. So we also work on that policy. So I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk a bit more.
I didn't know you worked in with albinos, because yesterday we actually had the White Ebony exhibition people here to talk about this beautiful exhibition they're doing, especially working with people living with albinism, and also talking about sort of the challenges, especially around learning. So the learning challenges and some of the tools that teachers need actually when they have children with albinism in their class. I wanted to sort of just kind of talk to you about how the role of the British Council has evolved over the last 75 years. I'm sure 75 years ago, one of the core things you were doing was probably language courses, which today now, because Nigeria is an English-speaking country by and large, how has the organization been able to evolve and stay relevant? Because today you're one of the most relevant organizations working, especially in the creative arts space, which we'll go into a lot more. How has the organization been able to evolve and stay relevant?
Well, thank you first for recognising that we're relevant. I mean, that is, it's a real pleasure to hear that. Over the 75 years, I mean, we started in Marina, and as I'm sure many people know, we ran a series of libraries across Nigeria. The world changes, the world evolves, the world modernises, and I think at the core of what we've done and why we're still relevant is because we listen, we engage, we really listen to the people that we work with, to the partners, whether that's private sector, civil society organisations, federal and state government. We respond to the needs of the people that we're working with. And over the 75 years, I'd like to think we've built up a great deal of trust and friendship with the people that we work with. So we've got credibility, we've got friends, we've got partners, and we've got trust, and that's enabled us to be as relevant as we are today and will be in the future. But we change, and our programmes have evolved. We sit down, we think very carefully about the feedback we get, the data, we use a lot of insight to shape our programmes so that we remain relevant to the people of Nigeria, because that's what really matters about us making an impact.
Ojoma, one of the things is how you use data in trying to make an impact. One of my first interactions with the British Council was actually around research, when you really started to try to understand the creative industry and really understand the economy, the players. Can you tell people a little bit more about how that work started? Because that work started about 5 years ago, if I remember correctly, when we first sort of came in contact 5, 6 years ago, really trying to understand that landscape, and then we'll talk about where you are today.
Yeah. So, yes, actually the mapping itself was about 5 or 6 years ago. Our work in creative industries predates that, though, so maybe 10, 12, 11 years ago, when this concept of a creative industry and an economy that's built on arts and culture started to take form and started to be defined in sort of specific and recognized as an economic contributor. And so that work started very much as trying to scope where the opportunity was. And one of the things that we ran into very quickly was that lack of data that you're talking about. And around the world, including in the UK, this idea of mappings to understand the value, the critical clusters, the pain points, if you like, was a real driver in getting government, civil society, communities to understand, on one hand, what their assets were that they could sort of monetize for an economy, but also from a government perspective, what areas to intervene. And so we started to do a lot of stakeholder engagement, because again, as we've talked about partnerships since we've been here, for us it's really important that the work that we do is driven by what the partners want and what they're interested in achieving. So we started to do a lot of engagement with government agencies, with sector individuals and organizations to try and get them to sort of get behind this idea, but also to see how what the relevance would be to their own businesses. And so in 2012, 2013, we then did the first pilot mapping of Lagos, where we looked at the fashion, the film, and the music sectors to try and understand, what's the value, how many people are working in that sector, what are they doing within the sector, what part of the value chain are they playing, etc. And we released that pilot report in 2013. And it really built our understanding of what the landscape was and what people were doing and where the opportunities were, but also what the gaps were. And it then went on to inform our work, as well as the work of various other partners that we continue to work with to this day. So some of the people that we met at the time and that we started to work with, Bank of Industry, Nexim Bank, Federal Ministry of Information, we continue to work with those partners to this day, and they continue to quote that study. So the idea was that we would do a pilot, and then we would find a way to embed that model more, because it's one thing to do a pilot mapping. The importance is really in doing it over and over so that you can track over time. And we haven't managed to yet do a full-scale mapping, but the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, I think, are doing a fantastic job now, and we do work with them, and we'll work with them more in tracking the value and the contribution of the creative industries to the GDP. So you'll remember that in 2014, which is partly why we haven't gone on to do another mapping, is that in 2014 they did a rebasing.
Yes.
And for the first time, they introduced elements in the sort of classification of contribution to GDP. They introduced creative industries and captured the contribution. And so in 2014, a year after that pilot mapping, was really the first time that in Nigeria we could say, right, in film, in music, in fashion, this is the contribution and this is where that contribution comes from. And MBS continued to measure the growth in that way.
And that mapping was really where the first time we actually understood the number of jobs being created in the different in the sector and industry, which then became a rallying call for the industry. So once again, congratulations on that. We're talking about sort of the numbers of how many people the creative ecosystem employs and really getting that data out. How do you feel data, how have you seen the progression of data availability in the last 10 years in Nigeria, especially around these critical industries that, traditionally we've had data around oil and gas, but not really around creative industry and even some of the new tech industries, and I know you guys are doing a lot of work on that. So tell us a little bit more about how you think data has progressed.
I think there has been a huge shift. And I think that the critical point was 2014 when the rebasing happened, because before then, as you know, there were several sectors, as you're saying, technology, telecoms, creative industries that had not previously featured in GDP calculations. And so I think that was a real turning point, and I think it has got better and better from that point, in the sense that now we can, when we talk in Nigeria, but also when we talk elsewhere about Nigeria, we can present, official statistics that show what the creative industries contribute, what the tech sector contributes. And I think that's one thing. But I think there's also data from other sources that also point to the revolution that's happening. So for example, GitHub, which is I think the world's biggest community of developers. Apparently the growth in developers from Nigeria is the fastest in the world in the last year. Wow. This is international platform of developers, right? So I think apart from our own data, there's data from other sources that also show that there's something wonderful, I think, happening where young people, in spite of whatever challenges they're faced with, in spite of the context, and because of the work that some critical partners are doing and some critical government agencies are doing, are able to then use online resources in many cases, or communities that they belong to create opportunities for themselves. It's the same thing with the creative industries. I don't know how many times I've been walking in obscure city, in town, village even. I think the most obscure, I was walking, the Hay Festival is a literature festival in Hay and Wye, and we were staying in this little village. And Afrobeats, Oliver Twist comes on, D'banj's Oliver Twist, and it's like...
That came on EastEnders.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Old Vic.
Oh,
wow. Queen Vic. What's the EastEnders? Queen Vic? I could not believe it. Yeah.
Wow.
They played it on Queen Vic.
And for me, it was the middle of winter, and it's like, oh, So I think, exactly. And let's not talk about the jollof rice we ate in Hay Festival as well. So, but I think there's different sources of data and evidence that point to this growth, this bubbling that's happening, and I think also the knock-on effect on how we're starting to get more diverse stories about Nigeria out there. And then when you travel, there's so many points of references, and they're asking you, do you know Aki and Popo? It's like, not personally. So I think it has really changed.
But even though these new narratives are being created, unfortunately, some of the stories that create and reinforce stereotypes do exist. So I want to talk about your work with governance and society and how that's helping to shape the fight against anti-corruption, the fight against corruption, sorry. And then, and as Biola was talking about how your focus has shifted in the past 75 years, right now the buzzword, unfortunately, in Nigeria is insecurity. So what's happening in those areas?
Yeah. So we do quite a lot of work in justice, security and conflict resolution, particularly in the northeast, not exclusively in the northeast. And like I said before, and really listening and what are the needs. So we work in partnership. Those programmes were funded by UK Aid, DFID, and now they're funded by the EU. But we work in partnership with civil society organisations. So a couple of months ago, for example, I was in Adamawa, in Yola, meeting with farmers and herdsmen that we bring together, and in the local, you know, in Hausa and in even more local languages, we work with organisations to try and manage that conflict, for them to come together. We bring in traditional leaders, which are clearly, you know, very important in terms of trying to find a way forward together to resolve that conflict, to create greater understanding, and through traditional, you know, rule of law as the mechanism to support that sustained kind of peaceful coexistence in the northeast. So another really important part as well is around, and Ojoma sort of touched on it, is working with young people to create opportunities, to give them a voice, because we know through our research in conflicts, and it's relevant to Nigeria, although clearly there's different triggers, but where people don't have a voice, where they feel that they don't have influence, where there's a lack of opportunity, they may well be, you know, radicalised. So we're working partly through our working skills, but also building confidence, giving people a platform to try and influence and engage more in a constructive way with society. So it's really important, and you know, sometimes we call that sort of upstream interventions. We're not dealing with the hard power that other sort of government organisations are, but those skills, those opportunities, that voice, that influence, and working with communities to support that. And that's really important. Clearly there's a need in Nigeria. But our work, as you know, because we've touched on it, the breadth of what we do, because we too want to change the narrative. We want to create that positive. We want people back in the UK and around the world to be talking about Nigeria and the opportunities and the fantastic talent and the energy and the excitement, not about the corruption and the insurgency, though it is a challenge that we're committed to supporting the Nigerian government and others on working on.
I want to ask you a question about some of the soft power and sort of the work you do in soft power, especially around theater. I felt that one of the things that I've seen with the theater festival is just how it's empowered young people, because it's run all by young people. And every time I go, I'm just blown away by the work that they've done, but also helping them find their voices.
Yeah.
And I think once again, it's sort of like, you could either be doing this or you could be doing that.
Yeah.
And so how do you invest in people doing these positive things, and how do you find the people? How do you work with them? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So Lagos Theatre Festival is actually one of the things we're most proud of. We started it in 2013, and it comes from this idea. We were working in various sectors and starting to work in the creative industries. And as you will know, historically, Nigerian literature, writing for drama, etc., has historically been very powerful and a very useful tool for civil engagement, civic engagement, and getting voices, multiple voices heard. But then I guess it went through a period of a bit of decline. All the infrastructure around literature and theatre sort of went away.
Well, like you said, it is a tool for social engagement, and when you're in a militarized environment, part of that is removing that voice of civil engagement.
Exactly. I wasn't going to say that, but yeah, that.
But we don't atmosphere anyhow.
So fast forward to sort of.
So you guys are diplomats. We can say, you know.
Exactly. Fast forward to 2010s and 2011s, we started to look at how might we re-engage in this space. And all the people that we spoke to initially were, oh no, theatre can't work here because we haven't got theatres. And so for a while, it was actually really difficult. Like, hey, actually, we really haven't got that many theatres. So how do you make a theatre program work? And so we started to engage anyway. We started to talk to directors, both in Nigeria and in the UK. And then it occurred to us that in theatre, there's a legitimate form of theatre that's about site-specific theatre, which is theatre in non-theatrical spaces. And so we decided, okay, we haven't got theatre, so we'll do theatre anyway. We won't pretend and try and make, I don't know, hotel banquet halls and pretend that they're theatres. We'll just make work for the spaces that we have. So in 2012, we supported 6 directors to go and do 2 months or so in the UK, looking at that model of making work for non-theatrical spaces. That was the first step. And so they were really excited by the prospect because even though public theatre has been I'm not suggesting that we introduce public theatre or work in public spaces to Nigeria because that has existed in our history and our overall traditions in squares, etc. But as a sort of, I hate to use the word organized, but as a sort of contemporary, not organized, as a sort of contemporary way to present work, it felt like that was dying a bit. And so through that process, we sort of re-energized, reintroduced people to that idea. And because it's part of our history and because it's part of our tradition, the directors that we supported then really bought into the idea, back to that thing about partnering. If the people don't want it, we don't do it.
Well, how did you select those directors?
So we would usually do an open call. And so we would design criteria and say, we're looking for X, Y, Z. So we would analyze the opportunity and say who would be the best fit. So with that particular one, we were looking for directors that were already making work. So at the time, we had people like Wole Oguntokun, for example, that was doing theatre at Terra. Yes. I think we had Segun Adefila, who was doing, had come from Unilag, and he was working with communities in Bariga to do theatre. So we designed the criteria, who's already working in that space, and how can we help them and work with them to sort of amplify the work that they're already doing. So typically, we would design criteria around opportunities and put it on social media, put it on radio, sometimes do flyers, go to National Theatre, Artist Village, Unilag, and hand them out, and then get hundreds, thousands sometimes of applications that we have to read and make a selection. So that's how we selected. So fast forward to 2013, we then worked with those directors and produced the first Lagos Theatre Festival at Echo Hotel in 2013. And for that one, we had 4 shows over 2 days, and about 400 people turned up, which was not too shabby. And so it was quite encouraging. And the first Lagos Theatre Festival we produced, we brought a production manager from the UK, had a team working across both places to put it on. That was 2013. Fast forward to 2019, Lagos Theatre Festival is now independent. It has its own board. It's no longer a British Council project. It just is a Nigerian institution, which we're very proud of. And averagely per festival, they have 40-odd shows. They have 6,000 people attending. And one of the things that happened last year, there was a sort of ranking of theatre festivals in the world, and Lagos Theatre Festival was 15th.
Wow.
Which we were so proud of.
These are the data we need to hear more. Oh, that's really impressive.
So it has morphed from British Council project to this thing, that it's its own thing. It has participation from South Africa, the States, the UK, obviously, Benin, Ghana, everywhere. It's now its own thing.
Fantastic.
So what else are you proud of? I mean, you must be enormously proud of that. But tell me the other highlights that you really feel the British Council made a huge difference in Nigeria.
So Lucy was talking about security and justice a minute ago. Many people don't know that the very first sexual assault referral centre in Nigeria was through a British Council project.
Wow.
And it was Justice for All, which was funded by UK Aid, DFID. And it was looking at drivers of conflict, but also the impact of conflict. And so looking at violent assault against women mainly, and looking at what the mechanisms were for support for those victims. And there was not a lot. So from the police and how women were treated when they came to report cases, to how it was judged in courts, to the medical assistance and counseling available, there was not a lot. Where there were pockets of good practice, but no sort of robust way of bringing it all together. And so Justice for All set up the first sexual assault referral centre in Lagos. And since then, that model has not only been scaled up within our own program, and it has now been scaled up through state governments. Lagos State is doing an excellent job, as I'm sure you've heard, and setting up all these mechanisms for managing violence against women and girls, sexual assault, and other forms of violent assault. But we've also got private individuals that are themselves investing in sexual assault referral centres. We've got state governments in Kano and various other places in the north also setting up sexual assault referral centres. So that's another thing that I think I'm huge. Particularly proud of. We talked about inclusive education. I think the inclusive education policy as well is also something to be proud of, because with the Albino Foundation is exactly what you were saying, learning resources, etc.
We're still with Lucy Pearson and Ojoma Ochai from the British Council, talking about all the amazing things you're doing leading up to your 75th anniversary. Thank you again for being here. Before we went on break, we were talking about just
The highlights,
Yes.
what you're proud of, and you were on inclusive education.
Yeah, it was just, to make the point that education policy will mean a change in how children with special needs or disability are embedded in the school system. Lots of states are doing great things. Lagos, again, is doing great things, but also various other states are starting to look at how special needs and how the education policy can be more inclusive and create opportunities for differently abled children, whether it's physically or psychologically or, intellectually, and creating a favorable learning environment for different kinds of learners. Yeah.
Well done. And you say thanks to us?
I know, I'm like, thanks to you.
Thank you.
One of the areas that we haven't talked on, but I know you do work in the fashion ecosystem. Tell us a little bit about how that started, how that came about, and what is your hope for that sector?
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying earlier about how do we stay relevant, and the growth of the creative industries is really significant. Nigeria is increasingly on the world stage there, but we recognise that lots of people have great ideas and real talent, but we're struggling really to sort of take that to market, to monetize it, to develop a business plan, to create an online presence. So we created a programme, the most recent programme, which was NICE, Nigerian Creative Enterprise, where we focus particularly on fashion, but also film in Nigeria. And Ojoma will say a little bit more, but over a 12-week programme, talking about the fashion entrepreneurs, we kind of started wide and came down to a number of people that had a really intensive programme. They went to the UK on a study tour, they were mentored, they met with designers. So we funded it, we delivered the programme in partnership with the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And again, we talk about partnerships, we talk about connections. So we worked with a number of partners in Lagos and in the UK. Together, those provided some mentorship, some steering. We did work with them to develop business plans, pitches, and it culminated in a pitch a few weeks ago in Lagos where the winners received a startup grant, and we also had a people's vote, and the winner of the people's vote went back to the UK to do some more work, some more job shadowing, some more mentoring. But it's really important to see these people grow. They're fantastic ideas, but to see those ideas grow into a real tangible business for an area where there is growth opportunity. But what really stood out is that people have thought about what the niche is. Where's there a gap? Where can they fill a gap? Where's there an opportunity? It wasn't replicating something that they've seen elsewhere. So, it was fantastic to support that emerging talent and provide some sort of business acumen behind these really creative ideas that they've got.
Yeah, talking of growth, I guess, so my dress is by Ayotomi Rotimi, exclamations. She's been around for years and years. She's one of the very first people that started to do Nigerian fashion retail. 10 years ago, she got a British Council grant to go to the UK to do a tour of the fashion sector, retail sector, to look at how that model worked and what sorts of business processes they used, etc. And obviously 10 years later, 12 years later, she's still here. She's still making clothes. She's still a thriving brand. So I think in terms of growth, that's exactly the way that we like to work. Identify people early on in their careers, support them, and sort of trigger something. And I think that's often perhaps what's missing. Once you trigger it, as you know from NICE, there were lots of then unintended consequences, if you like. We've supported people, we've given them grants, and suddenly other people identify them, a couple of them from the film. I was hearing yesterday, have been invited to do a 5-month residency in Germany because they were found on the NICE program. Various other ones have been invited by various fashion brands to come and work for them. And, so I think for us, it's about that spark, that initial setting somebody, exposure, setting somebody on a journey.
But why early in their career? if I may ask?
Because we think that's where it's the hardest to get support, because success has many friends, right? So we want to be that friend that picks you up when you're
When you had nobody.
yeah, when you had nobody. But really, it's because we feel that that's, and we know from research that that's where there's the hardest, there's the least amount of support. And one of the things, to be fair to your point, is we're also starting to look at how we can stimulate support for other people, for people beyond the initial, beyond the sort of startup phase. So with the pitch that Lucy was talking about, at the pitch we invited a number of angel investors, venture capitalists, different kinds of private equity organizations to attend the pitch and also be exposed, if you like, to these talent, to these kinds of talent that we're saying, okay, we've invested in them to this point where they're now further along in their journey. The bit of cash we've given them will take them even further. But who will, and again, it's the care that you were talking about, but who will then support them, and how can we bring them in contact with those other sources of support? Again, back to partnership, which is why we work with various partners, including these private equities that I talked about, but also banks and other kinds of funding organizations that we continue to look for, and almost bring into the ecosystem and say, right, here's this pipeline of people that have been through an initial process. How can you modify your own funding approaches, for example, to be more favorable? Because often it's not like the capital doesn't exist, but the capital doesn't understand that if I'm a fashion designer and I do a collection, all my costs are upfront, and I'm not going to start earning money until either the film is released or the collection is out and it's in stores, and you can't start charging me repayment loan of the loan from. Do you see what I mean? So it's those kinds of things.
So tell us about your team, because you do really the whole gamut. Identifying the talent must take, some particular sort of skill to recognize the talent and to actually talk through the practicalities, the nuts and bolts aspects of it. So how do you collaborate? How does your team work?
That's a good question. And I think that's why we rely so much on partnership, because we haven't got a big team at all. So in Nigeria, we've probably got about 8 or 9 people that work in the arts team. And then across the British Council, we've got,
180, including some of our work in the Northeast.
Yeah. So I think that's why partnership is critical, because a lot of what we know comes from talking to people like Biola who know what they're talking about. And then I just come and sound like
it's a lot. It's been just so much fun working with you, and just really how you work with partners, empowering local practitioners, and really trying to make sure that the local businesses are benefiting from the best the world has to offer. So best partnerships, even introducing us to other people in the UK, but also too just sort of training, capacity building. And I mean, when you guys look at Nigeria, do you go, wow, all these young people? Because when people see the population and they see all these young people, there is a little bit of fear. And that fear is, how do we benefit from this population? And there's sort of this, population curse or population dividend. How do you see it, especially through your work? Like, what are you pleased about and that gives you hope about this huge population we have?
To go fast.
What you're saying.
I genuinely, every day when we speak to the people and interact with the people that we work with, that gives us hope. And it's such a rewarding job. It's a real privilege to be here. We've not talked about our work in kind of society and sports, but there's a fantastic lady called Chinaza who went through one of our sports programmes, was trained as a football coach by football coaches from the UK's Premier League. And she's gone on to start her own football academy on the mainland, working with kids from disadvantaged areas. And it's fun. And hundreds of kids are there every Saturday morning. And they also, not just football, but they teach them skills and numeracy and literacy and team working through sport. And it's absolutely fantastic. So right from that work through to, we talked about policy reform, working at federal and state government levels. It's hugely rewarding every day. So sat in my office on Thompson Avenue, as lovely as the office is, it's out there doing our work with the people, meeting them, talking to the partners and seeing the difference it's really making. And, through the sort of sustainability, that's why partners are also important. One, so we're really listening, we understand the needs. We don't pretend to know everything. We need to work with other people. So we've got that collaboration. And then for those programmes to be sustainable, Lagos Theatre Festival being an excellent example. But we wouldn't be here, and, you know, I talked about friendly knowledge and understanding and creating opportunities. We wouldn't be here if we didn't truly believe the fantastic opportunities with the talent in Nigeria across all the work and with the young people we work with. It's a hugely rewarding place to be, and we're very proud of everything we do in Nigeria.
Well, Ojoma, so quickly before we wrap up, tell us what people can look out for. I know Thompson Avenue is always sort of a hub of activity. What activities what parties are you guys? I mean, someone turns 30, when you turn 75 in Nigeria, you've got to have a big party. So I'm buying my Ashra and B for that.
Well, have a year-long party, actually. So today is the actual anniversary, the 75th, and we've planned a year-long activity. And essentially what we want to do, thanks to you, is identify 75 people that we've worked with in the last 75 years and have a big old party. and talk about, again, talking more about the partners' work, because it's really about them and the people that we've worked with. So in the next year, we're going to have a series of online and offline activities in Nigeria and in the UK that's really sort of platforming some of these 75 stories that we're curating across arts, music, peace building, justice, security, football, everything. So people should look out for announcements.
And where should they go for that?
So on our Twitter and Instagram and our websites, on Twitter and Instagram, we're at NG British.
Okay.
And our website is just britishcouncil.org.ng. And of course, watch Arise TV.
Yes. Well, please come back and talk to us more about the stuff you're doing. Once again, congratulations. I wish you 75 and 100 more years. And, you know, we look forward to working on great work.
I know.
So thank you.
Exactly.
Thanks to you.
Thanks to you. Thank you.
It's time now for a short break. When we come back, Arise News analyst and producer Charles Ohwako will be joining us to review newspaper headlines.